Night static hums in the fluorescent air of a government annex, and the Americas flicker on paper. Five-letter groups march across onion skin sheets. At a scarred desk, Elizabeth Smith Friedman lowers a ruler onto fresh intercepts from Buenos Aires. No bombs, no plugboard diagrams, only paper, pencils, and a method her team calls impossible until it isn't. Outside, Washington sleeps. Inside, chaos is sorted by hand. Shortwave intercepts arrive half-chewed by weather and ionosphere. She works in essentials, tally marks, trial alphabets, crib lists built from habit, greetings, sign-offs, the way a frightened man might ask for weather, then pretend he didn't. Precision lives in ritual. Every mark means less guessing and more proof. The louder myth of the war says machines beat machines. Britain's bombs churn. Turing's logic bends rotors. Reality in this room is quieter. The network threatening the hemisphere runs through Latin capitals, coded by abware variants and layered hand ciphers, then poured into the ether toward Europe. She means to pry it open with pencil strokes. Stakes are not abstract. Those cables and radiograms describe ship sailings and harbor defenses. They talk about weather at the edges of convoy lanes. They whisper about men under gray water waiting for bearings. If the circuits stay dark, U-boats find meat in shipping lists, and the hemisphere turns porous. If they crack, arrests ripple through cafes and telegraph offices, and convoys live to see another dawn. She flips a sheet. A traffic clerk has penciled BA3 at the top, office shorthand for a Buenos Aires circuit. The groups are clean, perhaps too clean. She hears a pattern in the rhythm of five. Operators who prefer certain filler, a habit of ending with a polite flourish. She sketches a crib, saludos perhaps, or a Portuguese abracos, conservative steps. Try it, reject it, try again. The reversal arrives not as brilliance, but as error. An operator repeats an indicator, then fat fingers a letter. The mistake should bury the message. Instead, it gifts a foothold. She rocks back, sees the wall of groups tilt, pencils a hypothesis tree. If the day key is constant across this batch, if the introductory text sticks to cover names, a handful of plausible words can lever the rotors. The room seems to tighten as the sequence aligns. In later accounts, she would be linked to a machine she never touched. It is safer to say her team attacked Enigma and ciphered abware circuits and associated hand ciphers by exploiting operator habit and system design, often in liaison with British partners and without a bomb in sight. What matters tonight is the discipline. She writes a repeatable set of steps, a paper algorithm, so a dozen analysts can move like one mind and turn noise into edge. History prefers a headline and a single tidy hero. In Washington, other offices will often claim the roll-ups. The press will find angles that flatter badges. In Latin America, the agent called Sargo will trust the machine they can't see. Between those myths and this room, the gap is measurable in pencil shavings. This film stays with the work. We will show, with receipts, how a woman at a Coast Guard desk converted chaos into precision, unstitched a hemisphere-wide spy network, and kept ships out of crosshairs. We will be exact about what broke and what did not, and we will reckon with why the truth went quiet for decades. On her blotter, under the ruler's shadow, the first page of the method waits for the line she is about to draw. When it lands, the circuit won't be the only thing that opens. Start with a map of 2 continents and a pencil. The radio says war is here, even when the newspapers say it's over there. In a treasury building that doesn't look like a battlefield, the Coast Guard runs a quiet war. Elizabeth Smith Friedman draws breath, then draws lines. From 1939 to 1944, the Atlantic is a killing ground. Merchant hulls burn beyond the horizon. Insurance rates spike. Families track convoys on wall maps with pins. Far south, German intelligence threads wires through neutral and contested capitals. Operation Bolivar grows in coffeehouses and shipping offices, knitting Buenos Aires to Rio, Montevideo to Santiago, with circuit names that sound harmless until you read what they carry. Agents send weather from the plate, ship schedules from Pernambuco, gossip that turns to targeting once it hits a U-boat plot. They talk over telegraph counters and shortwave sets in Spanish and Portuguese and careful German, Traffic moves by cover names and code words, then hides under machinery and paper tricks. The pattern is familiar to anyone who has fought smugglers. The routes are improvised, but the hunger for routine gives them away. To understand the fight, you need the machine, and the machines that pretend to be machines. Enigma is a portable rotor cipher, a typewriter that scrambles letters through rotating wheels. The Wehrmacht, and especially the Kriegsmarine, add a plug board and later a four-rotor model. The math hardens, the doctrine is tight, and huge British bombs grind through the possibilities. The Abwehr is different. Some of its variants lack a plug board. Operators mix in hand systems, double transpositions, codebooks, simple substitutions, and their discipline isn't naval. That difference matters because improvisation leaves seams. America's hemispheric intelligence is not one system. The Coast Guard belongs to the Treasury Department until late 1941, charged with customs, shipping, and the borderlines where crime meets commerce. Navy's OP-20G stares mostly seaward and westward, its attention pulled by Japanese naval codes and fleet traffic. Army's Signal Intelligence Service grows fast but guards its lanes. The FBI wants courtroom cases and headlines. The British operate a private-public liaison out of New York, shepherding Latin American partners while protecting sources. Cooperation exists, and so do turf fights. Memos are as sharp as knives. This fragmentation gives Elizabeth both constraint and opportunity. The Coast Guard sits where ships, radio, and paperwork cross. In Prohibition, she learned that rum runners advertise their habits by accident, that patterns betray. She had earned her craft at Riverbank Laboratories decades earlier, apprenticed in a strange Midwestern think tank that hired poets and chemists to tackle codes. There, alongside William Friedman, she turned art into procedure, and myth, like Shakespeare conspiracies, into testable claims. The habit that survived was discipline. By the 1930s, she was the government's quiet specialist in illicit signals. She taught agents how to think about alphabets, how to see that frequency is a fingerprint. She wrote manuals in clear English, no mystique. In a room of jittery young analysts, mostly women, she is calm, exacting, and fair. The authority in the room does not come from rank. It comes from the fact that her methods work and her numbers add up. Now the constraints stack high. There are no bombs in this annex, no racks of four-rotor replicas. Intercepts arrive patchy, thunderstorm-scarred, and late, pulled from commercial lines and short-wave monitors with limited coverage. Messages drift between Spanish, Portuguese, and German. Code words change with city, operator, and mood. The budget is modest, the hours are not, and every mark the team leaves on paper will need to be defended to someone who wasn't in the room. Doctrine promises that machines solve machine problems, that you wait for keys or capture a briefcase, that the center assigns a target, then supplies a tool. Improvisation says you start with what you have: paper, memory, and a feel for human habit. The Coast Guard's tradition is small unit work at sea, boarding a suspect cutter, reading the deck with your boots, and the same ethic moves to the desks. They will board the traffic, not the ship. Here is the pivot. The orthodoxy would point Elizabeth toward naval schemes she can't reach and machines she doesn't have. Instead, she writes a local doctrine. She standardizes crib harvesting by culture and circuit, builds handmade frequency tables for each transmitter, and teaches analysts to treat operator sloppiness as a resource, not an obstacle. It is slow until it isn't. Once the patterns stabilize, the pencil outpaces the myth of the machine. By 1942, the room has a rhythm: dawn intercepts, afternoon sorting, night hypotheses tested against yesterday's map. Results move outward to partners, tightly measured, while the desk keeps its own counsel. The constraints remain. The method hardens. On the blotter, a ruler waits for the line that will turn routine into resolve. Beginning now. The order arrives without ceremony, a thin envelope that weighs like a change in doctrine. Inside, the language is spare. Create a special Coast Guard unit to attack Axis spy circuits in the Western Hemisphere. Priority: ship sailings, coastal defenses, U-boat weather. She reads it, hears shortwave hiss, and decides not to wait. Elizabeth says yes before the ink dries. The orthodox path says stand by for captured keys. for machines, for instructions from centers that prize naval traffic. The improvised path says start now with what you can touch: paper, pencils, human habit. Precision versus chaos is no longer theory. It's a choice of tools and time. She begins with people. Civil service lists yield mathematicians, linguists, school teachers, bright clerks who learn to hear patterns in typewriters. She recruits a majority women team, steady-handed and unafraid of monotony. Languages are a plus. Patience is mandatory. She tells them the truth on the first day. There are no bombies here and no miracle briefcases on the way. We will build the machine on paper. The room refits around that promise. Desks migrate, files multiply, card trays sprout tabs marked by city and call sign. They keep rulers, carbons, index cards, pencils shaved to hard points. Chaos in this room must be sorted into the same neat columns every time. Then she writes. The manual begins as a stack of precise pages, a procedural code for an impossible task. Step 1. Identify circuit families by location, hand, and chatter. Step 2. Standardize transcripts, preserve errors, tag operators. Step 3. Compile indicator digests, make frequency and bigram tables for each circuit. Note drift. Step 4. Harvest cribs by culture and workload, greetings, weather asks, cover names, and test them methodically against day keys. Step 5. Record eliminations, not just hits, so a second analyst can replicate the path. Midway through the first draft, a mini-crisis tests the scaffold. A liaison hints that British partners are reading some obware traffic, but their pipeline flows toward naval priorities and cannot absorb this hemisphere's mixed circuits. Doctrine says wait. She refuses the keel and tightens liaison instead. Quiet channels open in New York and Washington for tips and deconfliction, but the work stays here, outside the naval machine war. Now the mission needs a name that is not a name. In her notebook, she writes, silence the ring. Read if we can, roll up if we must, always deny the circuit value. The point is not just decryption, it is attrition, erode confidence, change behavior, force mistakes. Precision will not only translate messages, it will help erase senders. The first hires learn her cadence. They keep personal crib lists and communal ledgers. They cross-check each other's arithmetic. They are taught to love operators' sloppiness, repeated indicators, typed corrections, the lazy flourish of a signature at the end of 5-letter groups. The doctrine on paper is strict, but improvisation lives inside it. When a pattern deviates, the method adapts, and the paperwork documents the adaptation. A memo from elsewhere advises caution. Do not act on partial reads. Do not burn sources. She agrees on principle and builds a filter. Tactical extracts go out masked and delayed. Structural insights feed investigators without betraying exactly how the lock turned. The goal remains the same: make the network death to itself. By night, the unit hums like a ship underway. Pencils scrape. A clerk hauls out a repeated group that doesn't belong. 2 analysts argue in low voices about whether a Portuguese sign-off tends to precede a date. Elizabeth moves between desks, answering questions with questions, insisting that today's insight be written in tomorrow's procedure. The envelope began as an order. It has become a doctrine of one room, clear enough to spread, lean enough to last. On her desk, the manual's first page looks back at her, white with promise and risk. She draws a line across it, and the hunt begins in earnest for the circuit ahead. They start by listening, not by guessing. The room is quiet except for the soft rasp of pencils and the stutter of Morse printed by a clacking mill. Intercepts from Chile, Brazil, and Argentina arrive in ribbons and carbons, 5-letter groups stacked like bricks with gaps where thunder ate the signal. The unit treats noise as a landscape. Every smudge, every transposed letter, every operator pause becomes a coordinate. Precision pushes back at chaos, not with grandeur, but with a ledger and a slow, repeatable hand. They sort by circuit and by hand. Circuit means where and when: a late-night Buenos Aires schedule, a midday Rio burst, a Montevideo relay that favors Tuesdays. Hand means the human quirk stamped on the line, the spacing a telegrapher prefers, the habit of tapping a double letter too fast, the way a clerk in Bahia numbers pages with a slanting 2. They log each fingerprint into a binder that becomes a traffic census. Myth says machines erase people. Reality says a person leaves trace. Cribs grow from culture. Agents write like people, even when told not to. They open with a greeting, ask after weather, name a ship by cover, or mention a meeting in a cafe no one can quite forget. The team harvests likely words in the languages the network pretends to breathe. Saludos, abrazos, o tempo, viaje, the code names that recur like nervous tics. Each crib sits beside a strip of groups, a pencil line marking where it might bite. Most won't, enough will. The hypothesis tree is where paper pretends to be a machine. For a suspected Enigma run, they sketch plausible rotor orders based on known inventories for abware sets and the day's indicator patterns. Without a plugboard to haunt them, the search narrows. They use slotted cards and notched slips to mark letter pair alignments that survive a test mapping. Columns of ticks appear where rotor ordering might fit a crib. It is manual Benbudiismus in miniature, tuned for a different family of mistakes. Not all traffic is machine work. Abware circuits in the Americas often layer a hand system, double transposition, a code book, or a simple substitution beneath or above the machine. The team calls this stripping the system. First, they isolate headers and indicators, then they test for transposition and double encipherment tells, repeated bigrams, improbable letter deserts, congruent column heights when the text is written in guessed widths. If the texture looks handmade, they attack that wrapper first. Only when the grain smooths do they chase rotors. Bigram tables become the map. For each circuit, they build frequency charts by language and by operator because an Argentine clerk leaning German will not produce the same letter pair rhythm as a Brazilian clerk trained in Lisbon. Pages fill with counts: AA, AO, DE, EN, OS. Patterns isolate aliases, and aliases sort messages into families that share settings. Myth frames decryption as a single clever leap. Reality stacks 100 small certainties until a leap is the only option left. They maintain an error ledger like sailors keep a log. Repeated indicators, reused date groups, mistyped characters, lazy padding at the end of a rush. Each earns a line and an index tab. Sloppiness, properly observed, becomes a tool. One clerk's tendency to repeat the third indicator letter on Thursdays because the cafe is loud can tilt a whole search. The point is not to mock the enemy, it is to profile the constraints he lives under and make them work for you. Here is a worked slice pulled from a composite of surviving sheets. A Buenos Aires circuit labeled BA3 spits 3 messages within an hour. All 3 carry the same 3-letter indicator, an error that should not happen. The endings, when written in 5-letter groups, show a repeated pattern that could hide a civil sign-off favored in the city. The team suspects saludos lies beneath the last 10 letters. They pencil it under the groups and push through the rotors. The first pass fails. The letters don't map cleanly with the rotor order they prefer for BA3. Instead of forcing it, they reverse direction. Maybe the operator used yesterday's wheel order, but today's ring settings. They build a small grid of possibilities on a slotted card, notching every candidate where the hypothetical mapping stays consistent. Within minutes, a cluster appears at one rotor order. They test a second crib, o tempo, a weather ask, and the mapping holds. Day key pinned, batch unlocked. What opens is not poetry, it is logistics. The plain text mentions a freighter due out of Santos, a list of harbor lights recently blacked out near Recife, and a report of heavy fog just off the River Plate. None of it is spectacular, all of it is useful if you pilot steel into darkness. They package the extracts for partners in language trimmed of magic, and they log the structure, indicator, order, sign-off, for the next analyst who will need to repeat the trick tomorrow. Standardization keeps the room sane. Every sheet carries a header for circuit, date, operator ID, hand, and language tendency. Every test gets a code and a line in the ledger. They adopt a color system, black for confirmed fits, red for eliminations, and green for promising noise, so any analyst can step into another's path and see the same terrain. The paper algorithm is not romantic, but it is scalable. 12 minds move like one, and the myth of the lone genius stays outside. Midway through the spring, a reversal hits. A familiar circuit dries up, and a new one appears with cleaner groups and fewer errors. For a day, it looks like the method has been outrun. Then a clerk notices that the columnar feel of the text remains odd for a pure machine run. They test a double transposition wrapper with likely widths taken from common telegraph forms. The grid collapses into something legible. Under the hand layer, the old habits reappear and the rotors answer. Language drift complicates everything. Spanish is not Portuguese, and neither stays pure in the mouths of agents writing under pressure. The team builds bilingual and trilingual bigram lists, notes the influence of German spelling on borrowed words, and flags phrases that mask technical terms as cafe chatter. A German agent might write Tieto, but favor letter pairs that betray Deutsch at the edges. Those edges become doors. By treating language as signal, not decoration, they shade hours from the chase and reduce blind alleys. The ledger of eliminations grows thicker than the ledger of victories. That is by design. An analyst can pick up a problem midstream, review the codes for discarded rotor orders and dead cribs, and resume the search without losing momentum. The method transforms morale. Failure is not a void, it is a plotted point on the map. Doctrine would wait for captured keys or a lucky seizure. Improvisation eats the day with pencil work and delivers something you can verify. They respect time as a weapon. Each step is designed to be parallelized without loss of logic. One analyst can strip hand systems while another builds language tables, and a third tests rotor orders on a stable crib. When a fit emerges, the write-up stands on its own, timed and signed, so a partner can act without waiting for the author to wake up. The algorithm is procedural justice applied to letters. It makes accountability possible and turns speed into safety. A timeline builds in pencil and consequence. Reads from BA3 coincide with arrests in Buenos Aires cafes. Traffic on a Chilean circuit fades after a raid on a rented flat in Valparaiso. In Recife, a quiet detention follows a decoded cover name that matched a shipping clerk's chatter. Convoys adjust routes off whispered weather. A freighter delays its departure and never meets the prow that sought it. The room logs each sync point. The pattern is proof enough to keep going for another hard day. They know how the story will be told and where their chapter will be trimmed. Let it be trimmed later. The work now is to keep the method honest and the enemy uncertain. This is not the plugboard war. This is the human one carried on paper and error. Somewhere south, a sender believes his shield is perfect. Somewhere uptown, a headline waits. In this annex, the next batch arrives, and the silence it creates will speak elsewhere by morning. South of the annex, the same five-letter groups hatch and heat. Ceiling fans stir air, and a cheap radio key ticks against a wobbly table. A clerk in a linen shirt reads from a page that smells of ink and cigarettes, then sends what he thinks is armor into the night. This is Johannes Siegfried Sargo Becker's web. He believes in math backed by distance, Enigma variants for high-grade work, hand systems to wrap the rest, mail drops and sympathetic sensors to smooth the seams. His doctrine is confidence, discipline on indicators, code books kept close, circuits shifted when gossip thickens. To his agents, the machine's complexity is a wall. They transmit from flats in Buenos Aires and Montevideo, from sheds near Santos, from rooms where curtains blur the window and a calendar hangs 2 months behind. Five-letter groups rattle out in Spanish, Portuguese, and careful German. A sender pads with niceties he cannot quite abandon. He types the same sign-off whenever the hour is late. Becker's cables move ashore through censorship desks where a nod buys time. In some ministries, a friendly ear guides forms to the bottom of a stack. He writes guidance that reads like liturgy. Keep daily keys secret. Keep covers clean. Never repeat an indicator. He trusts the protocol because it sounds like certainty. Reality is the room he cannot see. Operators hurry, storms chew signals, and fatigue makes habits where doctrine demands steel. One night, a repeated indicator slips. On another, a transposition grid is reused out of fear of getting it wrong. The math is strong, the human grip on it is not. A debrief from a captured radio man later reads like a confession to entropy. He says the new indicators felt fussy, that the old block sat in muscle memory, that a bottle on the windowsill helped the courage but hurt the count. He swore the machine would forgive him because it always had. While his traffic moves, another theater writes its own story. In Washington press rooms, J. Edgar Hoover steps to a podium
and claims a clean victory over a Nazi spy ring in the Americas. The photos show a stern jaw, a seized radio, a map with pins. His lines are crisp: investigation, arrest, conclusion. The myth hardens quickly. The public reads that a domestic bureau sensed, tracked, and crushed a menace. There is no mention of a Coast Guard annex stuffed with women who spend nights building bigram tables, or of British liaison that coughed up a name at the right hour. Doctrine is retold as a straight line toward a headline. The timeline in the annex tells a different cadence. An intercept is logged at 0210. A workable crib is tested at 9:40. Settings align just after noon. A masked extract leaves for partners before dusk. At midnight, a quiet arrest follows in a city far south, coordinated through channels no press officer will describe. The chain is real, but it resists applause. For Becker, the shrinkage is gradual and inexplicable. Circuits go quiet, couriers run late, a consignee never appears at the cafe in Constitucion. He blames luck, then the censors, then a mole. The doctrine of invincibility has no page for a pencil in Washington that turns his certainty into pattern. For Hoover, credit is doctrine. He built a bureau on control of narrative and the theater of evidence. If a roll-up begins in pencil shavings and passes through foreign desks, the headline still arrives with a domestic logo. Reality is messier: liaison, compromise, and an improvised method that kept ships out of periscopes. The contrast holds across both rooms. Myth says the machine saved the message, and the badge seized the spy. Reality says people preserved errors, read them against cultures, and moved cautiously so they could move again tomorrow. Doctrine demands patience for big tools. Improvisation made a tool you could hold in one hand. Maps on a wall show consequences in ink. In Brazil, a circuit fades after an arrest in Recife. In Chile, a call sign ends when a flat yields a transmitter. In Argentina, Becker's circle tightens to silence. Each point pairs with ledger note, no exclamation marks, trail asking to be read next.
Receipts matter when myth gets loud. Here is how we anchor every claim. For the backbone, we draw from NARA Record Group 457, the NSA CSS holdings that include Coast Guard wartime cryptanalytic summaries and SRH series studies on obver traffic. We pair those with Record Group 38, Office of Naval Intelligence files that record OP-20-G liaison, tasking notes, and signal routing between Navy desks and the Treasury Annex. FBI FOIA releases on Nazi espionage in Latin America supply arrest reports, field memos, and public relations drafts that show how cases were packaged for headlines and courts. Across the Atlantic, the UK National Archives provide the parallel spine. The HW series, especially the ISOS papers on obver communications, captures British decrypt product caveats and liaison minutes. When a claim crosses borders, we show both sides: the American ledger line that starts with a Buenos Aires intercept and the British note that observes an obver operator's habit. Coast Guard Historian's Office monographs fill the gaps with unit histories, personnel rosters, and training write-ups that name the desks otherwise lost to anonymity. For secondary synthesis, we cite Jason Fagone's The Woman Who Smashed Codes for the personnel arc and archival leads, Stephen Budiansky's Code Warriors for interagency context, and NSA Cryptologic quarterly articles on obver Enigma and Coast Guard Unit 387 for the technical frame. Ralph Erskine's scholarship on obver systems help keep terminology exact and the distinction between services clear. Where modern retellings blur lines, these works let us separate the operational theater in the Americas from the naval machine war fought elsewhere. Accuracy guardrails stayed visible. We specify that obver used Enigma variants that, in many cases, lacked a plug board and were often paired with hand systems such as double transposition and small code books. We clarify that Elizabeth's team attacked Enigma-enciphered obver circuits and mixed hand ciphers in the Western Hemisphere with manual methods and selective liaison, not with bombs and not against the four-rotor Kriegsmarine traffic that taxed Bletchley Park. When terms like broke Enigma appear, we narrow them on screen to what was broken. Numbers receive the same discipline. Message counts, arrest totals, and roll-up timelines vary by file set. We present ranges when documents disagree and list the citation in the lower third. If a figure rests on an after-action memo written for publicity, we say so and pair it with a quieter internal report. Where accounts conflict about credit, Coast Guard, Navy, British liaison, or FBI, we attribute claims to their sources, then show the chain of evidence as it actually appears in the record. Visual accuracy keeps the story honest. When we show a machine, it is the correct obverse model for the period and place. No four-rotor naval diagrams, no plugboard when there was none. Forms, intercept sheets, and index cards are period-accurate reproductions built from the scans in RG457 and the TNA-HW files, with callouts that tie each on-screen note to a specific document and date. Quotations from debriefs and memos appear verbatim with identifiers, and paraphrases are labeled. The myth will shout, but the receipts will hold. With the scaffolding set, we can follow the consequences as circuits dim, couriers stumble, and the Atlantic grows a little less lethal. The first arrest happens before sunrise. A cafe door in Buenos Aires jams under police boots. A radio in back ticks as a clerk coils its wire. In Rio, a telegraph inspector slides a form across the desk and waits for a shrug that never comes. 3 BA3 messages become a name. Rendezvous, raid. Paper in Washington pulls bodies south. Convoys feel the change in smaller ways. A freighter out of Santos holds 12 hours on a bland instruction. A route angles east off a weather report no sailor has heard. A U-boat periscope stares at emptiness and chalks up luck. In Valparaiso, a call sign that sounded nightly becomes a memory. Couriers miss each other by inches as meeting points shift the morning their encryptions do. Fortune is choreography logged in pencil. By late 1943, the ring phrase. Becker hears it as absence, a silence where a punctual circuit lived. A courier who stops replying to innocuous cable phrases. A whisper from liaison that a name has grown dangerous. He rotates keys, tightens discipline, lectures on indicators. Doctrine insists procedure cannot be beaten by pencils. It is beaten anyway, not by miracle, but by math applied to people. Here, the many reversal. 1 week, the annex loses BA3 entirely. The groups vanish, replaced by a tighter circuit with cleaner text. It feels like a door slamming. Analysts strip the new traffic and find nothing to grip. Then a clerk spots a familiar sign-off picking through a hand layer, and another catches a repeated indicator that should not exist. The wall was repainted, not rebuilt. Consequences ripple. Brazilian police collect a shipping clerk in Recife, whose chatter matched a cover name. Chilean investigators seize a flat where a grid paper pad bears the ghost of a transposition. The imprint aligns with the schedule the annex had flagged. In Argentina, a landlord remembers a tenant who loved ceiling fans and left in a hurry. Reports suggest that by 1944, the network is largely deaf to itself. From a room that smells of graphite and paper dust, the lever seems almost indecently small. The weapon is a repeatable method. Strip systems, compile bigram tables, exploit errors, annotate precisely. Operators south of the equator placed faith in machines and procedure. Pencils made a map of that faith, then walked through it. Paper and pencils, one captured man says later, naming the tools like a warding charm that no longer works. The sea ledger becomes kinder by inches. Convoys pass through fog and rumor without incident. A liner arrives with fewer empty bunks. There is no cinematic tally, no last torpedo that misses because of one decrypt, just nudges that push risk a few degrees away from steel and flesh. Later files link diverted routes and delayed departures to lives that never met cold water. Then the work turns to courts. Elizabeth steps into quiet rooms and lays out how a message became a name. She speaks plainly. Judges ask how she knows. She shows how the ledger does. The testimony is careful, designed to convict without burning the path that must lead to the next case. When it's done, she walks back to a desk with no nameplate. Credit drifts elsewhere. Hoover stands by seized radios and tells a story that starts with surveillance and ends with handcuffs.
Headlines echo the narrative. The necessary complications are edited out. The interagency compromises that kept sources safe are not built for microphones. Myth rewards doctrine and the single hero. Reality is a chain of improvisations that rarely photographs well. For Elizabeth and her team, anonymity is not new. They had lived under classification since Riverbank and Prohibition, since the first time a pencil note delayed a departure on a deadly night. But silence has a cost. It flattens the ledger and erases the women who turned routine into weaponry. Her name fades from the public page, while other names, mostly male and often elsewhere, stand in for code breaking. Decades later, files open. Cold archive boxes yield memoranda, training sheets, and annotated intercepts with the same neat ticks we have traced. Scholars pull threads. Veterans remember a rumor about a room of women who could hear patterns in noise. The record restores balance. A women-led Coast Guard unit working with British liaison manually pried open Obware Enigma enciphered traffic and the hand systems that wrapped it, helping make a hemisphere harder to hurt. Here, myth and reality agree. The war did involve machines and great men with ideas, but it also required building a small, exact doctrine under constraint and teaching it until 12 people could wield it like one. Precision did not cancel chaos, it domesticated it. Doctrine did not vanish, it was rewritten with a ruler, because waiting for perfect tools would have cost time and blood. The lesson travels. Intelligence is craft before technology, and credit steers what gets funded and trusted next. One more ledger line. She closes a folder and files it in a cabinet that will not open to the public for years. Outside, night radio fizzles and dies as the ionosphere shifts. In another country, a man called Sargo finally understands that his math cannot save him from his own habit. The network is not gone, but it is quiet and the sea breathes easier. If you want the full arc, where the craft begins and where it spreads, follow it carefully back to the mathematicians in Poznan, who sketched Enigma's bones, and forward to the analyst who turned cribs into probabilities at Bletchley. The path runs through rooms like this one, lit by fluorescent hum and stubborn patience. Keep the right names in the record in this long, unfinished history, and keep looking for the next pattern waiting to be tamed.